Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. This is Mr. Middlepath, and in this video, we're going to go over a very important topic of what is the definition of virginity, who is a virgin, and whether we should marry a virgin or not is going to be covered on a different video, inshallah. The purpose of this video is to go over the definitions of virginity, what it means for someone to be chaste, and I'm going to try and prove in this video that because virginity is very difficult to pin down when it comes to marriage and trying to know whether someone is good for us as a spouse or not, we should look at chastity and chaste behavior as the red flag, as the green flag, sorry. So, and lack of it as the red flag, because virginity is in some way, shape, or form impossible for you to know. This is like ilm al-ghayb to a certain extent. So let's get to it, guys. The two working definitions we have is definition one, when we're talking about women, a girl with an intact hymen, and definition two, when we're talking in general, penetrative sex, lack thereof, right? Lack of penetrative sex. Definition one is not an Islamic definition, it is a cultural definition that has a lot of problems. So, for example, you can't pin it down because number one, a woman can, believe it or not, have an intact hymen and have had penetrative sex. For example, and we're going to be a little bit graphic here, let's just say a man is not fully erect, manages to penetrate her, doesn't damage the hymen. Okay. Number two, someone pleasuring her, a man, or she is pleasuring herself with her fingers. This will damage the hymen or stretch the hymen. And number three, some people are just born with very natural, stretchy, strong hymens that don't break and will only break during giving childbirth. It's actually very, very difficult, even for doctors or people that are in the field of gynecology, to know through observation of the vagina whether someone has had penetrative sex or whether someone's a virgin or not, right? It's just very difficult to tell. The other thing is, even if a girl does not have an intact, even if a girl does have an intact hymen, what about things like anal sex? What about things like oral sex? According to definition one, the traditional definition, she's technically still a virgin, and this becomes very problematic. Definition number two is more comprehensive because it includes anal sex and it includes vaginal sex. So when we're talking about a man or a woman, this is more of a comprehensive definition. Someone might talk about, okay, well, what about oral sex? What about fingering? Does this nullify? Does this make someone a virgin or not? And we'll get to that in a moment. First, let's get back to the hymen issue and some misconceptions. So modern day claims is that some women are born without a hymen, or you can break a hymen through horse riding or gymnastics. This is quite rare to the point that it shouldn't be used as an argument, and it's kind of detracting away from the fact that a woman having a hymen actually does matter as part of virginity. Like bleeding was there for as an indicator for a reason, because it did happen, right? But on the flip side of things, traditionalists claim that the hymen must break during sex and that she must bleed as proof of virginity. This is false, because it's not always the case, and Islamically that can't be the case, because the what a man needs, or what a woman needs, or what anyone needs in order to prove that zina occurred is 4 witnesses. If someone gets married to a girl and the girl says she's a virgin and she doesn't bleed the first time during sexual intercourse, that is not Islamic evidence for anything wrong ever having happened. So hymen or not, or having the hymen not being broken during sexual intercourse or lack of bleeding is not an Islamic proof whatsoever. Okay, so we need to keep that in mind. So the point of the video is I want to raise questions in the viewer's mind, not to create suspicion, but to create awareness and understanding that just because a woman does not bleed during sex doesn't mean that she's not a virgin. Here some people might want to, this is just to put some people at ease. And on the flip side of things, if a woman does bleed during the first time of sex, that doesn't mean that she has no sexual experience. She could have done things such as anal or oral or so forth. And in some countries, I don't want to say which countries, this is actually very common, because they follow definition number one, the traditional definition of that a virgin is someone with an intact hymen. You see people doing haram things, doing zina, specifically anal sex and other things, so that they have an intact hymen and they're still a virgin before marriage. And this is, of course, absolutely false. They would not be considered a virgin Islamically, right? So the point is that this is nearly impossible to prove. Even someone saying, oh, she's really shy, that means she must have been a virgin. That's not a clear indicator either, because we live in a time of fitna. And the statistics of, for example, teenage girls in the UK or in the US, I think the number was as high as 80%. If they get involved with a boyfriend or so forth, they get pressured into sending nude pictures, people getting pressured into having sex prematurely before they even understand the implications or even know what sexual intercourse is, and they're psychologically ready for it. We have a lot of realities and a lot of fitna in our day and age, and it doesn't matter where you're from. It's very prevalent in Muslim countries, just as very prevalent in non-Muslim countries, that just because someone is shy or just because someone prays 5 times a day, that doesn't mean that they 100% never got involved in any type of sexual experience. So now let's move on to the point of, okay, what about oral sex? What about fingering? What about someone that, stopped just short of actual penetrative sex, right? Is that zina? It is a type of zina. For us to understand the definition of zina is actually very broad. So scholars have said that even someone imagining having sex with someone other than their wife is a type of zina. But when we're talking about zina, there's a type of zina which is the legal definition, penetrative sex, which would have the punishment of 100 lashes and a year of banishment if they're not married. And if the case of someone who is married, man or woman, the severe penalty of stoning to death, right? But that's for penetration. For oral sex or things like that, that is not going to fall under that legal definition, but it will still be considered a type of zina. So technically they would be a virgin, but they would be unchaste. So what's the definition of chastity? Chastity means muhsina or muhsin, and that means that people who avoid haram sexual activities, they guard their private parts, and this would include things like gaze, proper dress, conduct, so forth. So muhsin comes from fortified or protected. So jidarun muhsina or jidarun muhsin, fortified walls. A castle would be muhsin. A married woman or a married man is muhsin, because even though they're having sexual intercourse, they're doing it within a lawful means. So they are protecting their private parts from forbidden or illegal sexual activities. This would mean that they are muhsin. So muhsin means chaste. And chaste behavior is what we would want to look at when it comes to marriage, because virginity is impossible to prove, right? And I stand by that. Virginity is impossible to prove. We need to look at chaste behavior. Chaste behavior is more easy to ascertain. It's more easy to look at. We cannot accuse someone of unchaste behavior without 4 witnesses. Otherwise, the punishment is that the person accusing, they get lashed, and their testimony is never accepted in court ever again. This is a very severe punishment. It means that the person is untrustworthy, which would mean that, guys, we need to be careful when using certain terminology that the West is comfortable with using, such as the word thought, right? Or such as the word SLUT, or calling a girl something. If we use that term and we're implying that they're loose sexually or that they have had sexual intercourse, and we don't have 4 witnesses, that means that Islamically you would get lashed. I think it's 80 lashes if I remember the ruling correctly. And your testimony is never accepted in court ever again, which means that you're an untrustworthy person, which is a much more severe punishment than the lashes, right? So when someone is looking to get married, whether it's a guy looking to get married to a woman or a woman looking to get married to a man, because virginity is really something very private that's between the person and Allah, you're not really going to know. This is not to raise suspicion in everyone's mind. Rather, this is to put trust, right? That marriage is coming from a point of view of trust. Don't look, oh, is she a virgin? Because you're not going to know. Especially in today's day and age, nothing necessitates anything anymore. Guy with a big beard prays 5 times a day. That doesn't necessarily mean that they never had sexual experiences before. Girls wearing niqab, prays 5 times a day, again, that doesn't mean that they have never had uh, sexual intercourse or sexual experiences before. We want to assume the best, but we want to look at it from the point of view of chastity. If we try and look at chastity and whether a person is acting with chastity, this is going to be a much better indicator. How do we know? We see how the person acts. We see what kind of friends they have. We see how they carry themselves, how they conduct themselves. Okay, these things are going to give us a better indicator, right? And on a side note, if someone, let's say a girl is a convert or a guy is a convert and they had a lot of sex before they became Muslim, and now they're sincere in their Islam and they made repentance for the things that they did in the past, are they chaste even though they had sex in the past? The answer is yes. Virginity is a physical state, whereas chastity is a state of being. It's more internal. A woman that gets raped, for example, God forbid, and may Allah protect all of us, but let's say a woman gets raped and she's a virgin. Yes, she lost her virginity, but she's still 100% chaste because it wasn't her intention what happened, right? A person that made a mistake, and let's say they lost their virginity, they're not chaste, but if they make their repentance and they're sincere and they start guarding their private parts again and they don't engage in haram relationships, and they're sincere in their repentance, they become chaste once again. So that definition of chastity applies to them. Just like we said, the definition of chastity is protection. So a fortress that gets bombarded or gets invaded, if that fortress gets rebuilt and the walls get repaired, the fortress is protected once again. So similarly, because chastity has that meaning, someone who did a mistake and repented, they're chaste. Someone who had something happen to them and it wasn't by their will or by their free will, they're chaste. Does that make sense? So this is what we need to look at. We need to look beyond virginity because again it's very difficult. So we're not living in the time of the Prophet Muhammad SAW where everyone in the community knew each other. You had the Prophet Muhammad SAW's guidance right at hand. If something bad happened, you can go to the Prophet Muhammad SAW for advice. We're living in a world where there's a lot of injustice, where people don't know each other, where if you're marrying someone, most likely you're marrying someone that their past is unknown, from a different community, sometimes even from different countries if things are happening online and so forth. So there's a lot to this. And when we're looking at spousal quality, trying to determine whether this person is behaving in a chaste manner is going to give us much more insight as to what kind of spouse they will be than to try and figure out whether they are or are not a virgin, which is almost impossible to ascertain with 100% certainty. And I hope that made sense, inshallah. And if anyone has any questions, please, leave it in the comments below. Take care. Peace out. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.